What's up, guys? Welcome to Casual Duelist. It is a different voice today because me being Bandit, have taken over his little dungeon for now. And I'm going to be going over Jim Crocodile Cook's deck for a 3 times tournament coming up shortly. His skill is Major in Paleontology. The skill consists of once per turn, you can banish one card from your hand face down, then place one dig counter on this skill. The maximum is 1. If a face-up fossil fusion monster you control is destroyed by card effect, you can place another dig counter on your skill, but it, again, can only be at the max of 1. Once per turn during your main phase, you can remove one dig counter from this skill to fusion summon one fossil fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing materials mentioned on it from your graveyard, or from any graveyards, except for materials with specific graveyard requirements listed. This is treated as a fossil fusion summon with fossil fusion. So we will be going over his deck and what I have built for it. It is both strong and very good for strategy. Speaking of strategy, we're going to start off with Fossil Dino, and I call it Patchy Hollow because I have a hard time with Dino names. If you guys have questions for that, definitely ask Casual. He is much better at that with those kind of names than I am. They become tongue twisters for me. But Dino's little effect here as a rock effect monster is if this card is flipped face up, destroy all special summon monsters on the field. Neither player can special summon a monster. So this card is good to have on the field if you're trying to get yourself set up. It's a good 4-star. It's got decent attack with it being 1200 and decent defense with it being 1300. But the main advantage you get with him, no one can special summon. So it sets you up, kind of get yourself on the board, maybe get your traps and spell cards ready, or just get your hand ready to do one big attack. Definitely a good card to start with. Again, it is a 4-star, so it makes it easy. Just get yourself set up. Followed up by him, we have our little clammy friend here in Shell Knight, another rock effect monster. When this card is normal summoned, you can change this card to a defense position, and if you do, you inflict 500 damage to your opponent. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect or destroyed by battle, you can add one level 8 rock monster from your deck to your hand. Or, if Fossil Fusion is in your graveyard, you can special summon it instead for the rest of this turn. You cannot activate cards or effects of cards with the same name as the card. You can only use this effect of Shell Knight once per turn. So the good thing about this one, again, is another 4-star. And it benefits off of Patchy here a little bit, because with that, and it being a 4-star, it's not special summoned. So having 3 of these guys in there, you have over 6,000 defense that can be sitting on your field for a defensive setup. So if maybe you can't stop the special summon, but you have a good defense setup, if you lose this, you inflict 500 damage to your opponent. So you can deal up to 1,500 damage to your opponent with these guys in defense. And again, it's 2,000. So you still have the chance where, if it's sitting there, maybe they have a smaller monster, you can definitely stop them with one of these. They're good, again, for a setup and definitely help with Patchy if he's on the field. You can have at least 2 more of these guys sitting there with him and have a decent defense until you really can get into this deck and really get into your hand. The next monster that is good to have as well is our weathering friend, our weathering soldier. My English is amazing, as you can tell. It is another rock effect monster. If this card is destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can add one Fossil Fusion or one card that mentions Fossil Fusion, except Weathering Soldier, from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Weathering Soldier once per turn. Once per turn during your end phase, this card loses 600 attack. So another 4-star, another good card to start off with. But on this one, it's more for its attack more than it is anything, because it has the 2,000 attack instead of having either none or only 1,200. Only downside to this card is, though, and the reason we have two of them, is you lose 600 attack every time you end your turn. So by the end of about round 5 or your 5th hand, these guys are no longer functional as attack because they've lost 600. So around that time, maybe even before that, you've already lost the attack of these guys, but they have a decent amount of defense, and their effect definitely helps when you can pull from your deck, if that makes sense. With that, you can pull maybe another Shell Knight if you don't have it, or if you haven't pulled Patchy yet, you can pull him out of the deck and get ready to play him and make yourself have some kind of defense, maybe if you have nothing on the board, or again, because you can't pull another one of these, you have backups that you can pull from for your deck. Another, not so much of a fossil or a soldier, but we have our big Tusk Mammoth that is a heavy hitter. Obviously, it is a 5-star monster, so it would have to be special summoned. So having Patchy on the field for this one, not a great idea, mainly because you cannot pull him onto the field with him on the field. Can use him to special summon it, but he has to come off the field to pull this. His effect is monsters your opponent controls cannot attack during the turn that they are summoned. So it's good to have him with the 2,000 attack and the 1,000 damage. Again, the 2,000 definitely hits, but it makes it really easy so that if you're facing a Neos build or you're facing some kind of build with another set of heavy hitters and you need a way to stall, having the big Tusk Mammoth helps slow down the attacks and makes it a little bit easier kind of to see what you have to do in your next hand, or hope that in the heart of the cards you get something that can stop the big thing across the pad from you. Definitely a good card to have. I only put one in this one because with it being, it only stops an attack when they're summoned. Maybe you're not wanting to special summon so many times for such a small monster. You want something maybe for your extra deck. And we'll get into that here in a few. But that is definitely a card to have kind of sitting in the back row waiting to be pulled. Another good small monster that is good to have, that is a 4-star, is our Fossil Tusker. In his rock effect, if this card is destroyed by an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, it inflicts 400 damage to your opponent. So, much like your Shell Knight, like your Shell Knight, the difference with this one is if this is destroyed, no matter what, you're adding the 400 damage. Shell Knight has to be in defense mode and taken down, and it's 500, if I remember reading that correctly, damage to your opponent. I am correct on that. My brain just clicked. It is the 500 damage when this is destroyed in defense mode, and this adds on another 400. So if you lose both your Fossil Tusker and your Shell Knight in the same hand, one's in defense, the other one just is flat out destroyed, you're adding 900 damage to your opponent that can set you up for maybe something like your Mammoth or your Weathering Soldier. Another one, though, that we are going to get into that is probably the biggest one that you want to play into if you cannot get your fusion summons is Gaia Plate, the Earth Giant. This big monster has 2,800 attack and 1,000 defense. So definitely another hard hitter. One of the biggest ones, close to one of the biggest ones in the deck. His effect is, once per turn during your standby phase, banish one rock monster from your graveyard or send this card to the graveyard. You can special summon this card from your hand by banishing 2 rock monsters from your graveyard. If this card battles an opponent's monster, that monster's attack/defense become halved during the damage calculation only. So if you're on the field and with him being 2800 and you're facing a Blue Eyes, you're taking his attack and defense and you're cutting it in half. So something like this definitely is good to have, especially with this deck. And this is attacking. You can take down some bigger monsters, especially with it being halved, and moving in for a bigger hit and taking down bigger monsters that may be a pain in the butt for you to try to take down ahead of time. So definitely a good one to have. But that all leads up to one more monster that's not in the extra deck, but is definitely worth putting in. I've put 2 in, is the Mega Rock Dragon. This dragon's effect is cannot be normal summoned/set, must be special summoned from your hand by banishing any number of rock monsters from your graveyard. The original attack and defense of this card becomes the number of rock monsters banished to special summon it, and times that many by 700. So you're taking that and say you're banishing 2 of your Gaias and 2 of your Shell Knights. So you're taking 4 times that 700, you're getting about 2800 damage. Makes it a bigger monster. Obviously, you banish most of these, your damage raises. You don't banish all of them. You lessen the attack and defense. But if you have enough in there and you still have monsters in your hand, sometimes it's good to do that because then you have the ability to continuously hit at a decent size and a decent chunk of damage done, depending on how many monsters your opponent has on the field. Again, with Patchy being on there, a little harder to bring on the field, but definitely something I would play into. You'll get to see that hopefully here soon as I get to play the decks on both casual and on my own channel as we're getting ready for that. And then we're going to get into our spell cards. These ones are definitely going to be fun. As we have Pot of Avarice. I probably butchered that. Again, you can ask casual. This is one of my first decks, so it is. I apologize ahead of time if I'm butchering these a little bit. But this one is target 5 monsters in your graveyard, shuffle all 5 into the deck, and then draw 2 cards. So this is definitely good if you are bricking or you've been having a lot of your monsters knocked down and you're needing something desperately. Playing one of these is definitely a strong position. It puts 5 more cards in your deck, and more than likely, you're able to draw another, hopefully, 5 cards. And that sets you up for maybe one of these fusion summons, that you may need back on that field, helping reinforce. And then the other one that we are all very excited for, and I know Casual is kind of excited for this one, is the Mystical Space Typhoon. This card comes back into the deck. Definitely a fun one to play. You get to target 1 spell or trap on the field and destroy that target. So if you're playing Dinos and you're having to face Jurassic World, or you run into a Dark Magician with, and I can't think of the spell card that comes to mind, but I know there's a field spell that ups their magic. Having one of these in your card, I have 2, definitely makes it worth it because you can take that field spell out, makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to open up the field and take down that extra damage boost that might be given off by a spell or a trap. But getting into our trap cards, I have 2 Saku Armor. I more than again likely butchered it. I just call it the Saku Armor. The trap is when an opponent's monster declares an attack, target the attacking monster and destroy that target. So another one to have that's kind of a wild card. You can scare your opponent with these if they know it is in your deck. Because if they attack, we'll say with a Blue Eyes, having something like this will stop their attack and destroy the monster. Now you're not having to worry about something big coming and hitting you. You're shutting it down early and more than likely turning the duel in your favor. Definitely two good traps to have. And then the last one. And this one is good for this deck especially because it's called the Release from Stone. Target one of your banished rock monsters. Special summon it when the card leaves the field. Destroy that monster. When that monster is destroyed, destroy this card. So we know we have some of these cards that banish. Specifically our Mega Rock Dragon. With them being banished, yes, it takes down from this attack and defense. But that pulls another card out of your banished and it puts it in your deck or hand. You get to use it on the field. Obviously, you're summoning it. So it becomes a little bit nicer. So that if you need something or you banish something big, like you banished your Gaia plate, you get to bring that back on the field. Then it becomes part of your army, maybe making it a little bit easier to turn a duel again back into your hand. Maybe gives you a little bit extra setup, things like that. Going into the extra deck, we ended up adding a Fossil Warrior. This one is Skull Knight. We have two Fossil Warriors. This one is a Rock Fusion effect. It is one rock monster plus an additional level 5 or 6 monster. Must first be special summoned with Fossil Fusion. If this card attacks a defense position monster, it inflicts piercing battle damage. When this attacking card destroys a monster by battle, you can activate the effect. This card can make a second attack in a row. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one monster on the field and destroy it. You can only use this effect of Fossil Warrior Skull Knight once per turn. So with it being a 2400 and a 1100 defense, having something like this is taking a Saku Armor or taking, obviously it's not on a monster, but you're taking your MTS or your Mystical Space Typhoon, but on a monster. So when you banish this, again, maybe you took down a small monster, try to do a second attack, bigger monster stops you, it goes to the graveyard, you banish it, and you can take that bigger monster down with you. Opens up the field again, and maybe opens up the door for, a release from the stone or pulling something from your graveyard. The other warrior that we have is our Fossil Warrior Skullbone. This fusion monster is a one rock monster plus, a level 4 or lower monster. Must be special summoned with Fossil Fusion. This card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. You can banish this card from your graveyard, add 1 time stream from your deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect of Fossil Warrior Skullbone once per turn. Obviously, we aren't using the time stream in this one. Not that strong of a spell card, at least in my opinion. I'll go over that on my channel at some point. But a strong card to have, especially because you can play these guys a little more often. Because it is one rock monster plus a level 4 or lower. So you have your Dino, you have your Shell Knights, things like that, even your Fossil Mammoth that can play into this and set you up down the road with an attack of 2,000 and a defense of 800. At least gets a little bit stronger on there or on your board. And then even if these guys are done, you can use that Fossil Fusion again right into a bigger Fossil Warrior Skull Knight as well. And then we have our two favorite Buggies in Fossil Machine Skull Buggy. It is a 1 rock monster in your graveyard. So a little bit different than your Fossil Warrior Skullbone and your Fossil Warrior Skull Knight. These guys specifically have to be 1 rock monster from your graveyard. It is a level 4 or lower monster. Must be first special summoned with Fossil Fusion. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can inflict 600 damage to your opponent. You can banish this card from your graveyard, Add one monster from your deck to your hand that mentions Fossil Fusion. You can only use this effect of Fossil Machine Skull Buggy once per turn. So having something like this is good, even though it only has 1400 attack and 1200 defense. If you get a good hand early, you can start doing some early damage. So if you're destroying a monster, you get to add another 600 damage. It's almost like piercing damage. Obviously, it's not going through the defense to attack the opponent, but it's taking down one of their roster and adding a 600 damage bonus for you to be able to start taking down your opponent maybe a little faster. And again, these guys can fusion summon into both your Fossil Warriors. Great 2 cards to have. A lot of fun to use, even though you do have to banish out of your graveyard. But that's where these Release from Stone come into play. And last but not least, one of my favorite cards out of this deck is our Fossil Dragon Skull. I cannot, again, say the last half of that. Dino names are not my specialty. Definitely talk to Casual about that. He'll be able to get that out a little bit easier. But it is a 1-rock monster and a 1/1 level 7 or higher monster from your opponent's graveyard. A little bit harder to play, but definitely worth it if you can get that level 7 or higher monster. Must first be special summon with Fossil Fusion before damage calculations. If this card battles an opponent's monster, you can switch the current attack and defense of that opponent's monster until the end of the damage step. If this card attacks a defensive position monster, inflict piercing damage. If this fusion summon card battles an opponent's monster, any battle damage it inflicts to your opponent is doubled. So with that, it has the piercing, and you're doubling your damage. So it definitely becomes good to have, and becomes one of your hardest hitting cards, especially with it having the 3500 attack. Yes, it's a little bit harder to summon, but it is a lot more fun to use. I got to practice with it a little bit, and it was a lot of fun to hit with. And it's just an overall fun card. I love that it's almost a T-Rex, and the fact that it is a fossil dragon. You don't even see the wings. You see bones of it. But it's fun. It's cool. This whole deck is a lot of fun. I will be using it in the 3x tournament being hosted here shortly. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to you guys being able to use it. Again, this is the Major in Paleontology from Jim Crocodile Cook. If you guys have nothing else better to do today, though, I thank you for hopping in. Have a great day. Stay safe and enjoy your time with family or friends. See you guys.